Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to give you a visual tour of the Hanwei Kami Katana. It's a feature-rich sword from Hanwei that's no longer made and kind of holds a special place in sword history, if you will, or at least it does to me, and I hope you enjoy the video. Now, why am I doing a visual tour and not a review? Well, this is a pretty expensive sword, and swinging it around, cutting things with it, diminishing the condition would devalue it. I don't want to do that. It certainly can do it, but I don't want to. And two, I don't really feel up to it. I finally caught my case of COVID. I still have my other ailments going on, and swinging it around just isn't in the cards at the moment. But I can blab about its features, of which it has many, and I hope you enjoy. Now, the sword itself is still on CAS Iberias website, and it's listed as an MSRP of $1,500, but maybe it's my jelly brain. I remember it selling for more than that at some point. Now, typically, CAS Iberias website has an MSRP, and then they would sell for less than that at dealers. But many moons ago, there used to be martial arts stores, and you would go there, and they might have a catalog that you could peruse. And in that catalog, if you were doing it 10, 15, 20 years ago, you might find the Hanwei Kami Katana. And the Kami was the top tier of swords from Hanwei, or at least it represented itself that way in the catalog. Hanwei has made subsequently higher-end swords than the Kami Katana. It wasn't their top tier. There was the paper crane made from their iteration of Tamahagane. I believe they've done some other higher-end swords. But in terms of the Japanese-style swords, in the catalogs that I saw as a younger man, the Kami Katana was this top-tier sword, and it was kind of the unattainable. And I want to say that the martial arts store that sold it, it was $2,000. For some reason, that's in my head as the price point, but I digress. It's on CAS Iberias website at $1,500. Maybe that's what it was in the catalog. Anyway, it is a feature-rich sword by Hanwei, and it does a lot of the different things well that Hanwei does well, and it's worth kind of a tour because they're not made anymore, and it's uncommon to see them. I didn't realize when I saw them in the catalog that I would have had as many of them go through my collection as I have. So I've had the Wakizashi and the Tanto, and I've had 3 or 4 different Hanwei Kami Katana, but it's been a few years since I've had one, and I've gotten better with a camera, and I talk more about them on YouTube, so why not share? Anyway, I'll go over the fit and features. It's a relatively expensive sword, though, so do keep that in mind. I'm scrutinizing it with more than the level of scrutiny that I would do the base models from Hanwei. And yeah, here we go. So first off, the Kashira is in a dragon motif. And honestly, there's a story going on with the set of fittings on here that I don't really know. They seem not hodgepodge, certainly, but the Kashira has dragons. The Fuchi has like cranes and some floral stuff going on the other side. There are Kami guardians on the Tsuba and cranes on the opposite side of the Tsuba. I'm not sure what the Manuki are, but I can make out scales. Anyway, there's a lot going on the fittings, and I'm not sure what story exactly it's trying to tell. It didn't clarify anything with the description on Hanwei's website, but the Kashira, anyway, has a dragon motif, and it kind of subtly shows, I think, what Hanwei does well. One, these are supposed to be made out of black and bronze. It's nice to see bronze used. It's not, I don't know how historic it was in Japanese-style swords, but I like to see it. It's a different material, and there's tasteful little wisps of gold that seem to be well-placed, and that's consistent on the Hanwei fittings. They tend to do this gold detailing and silver detailing pretty well, and the casting quality on most of their fittings is really nice. So in terms of the fittings themselves, not necessarily how they're affixed to the sword, they tend to be pretty nice. And this, I don't think, is any exception. It appears well cast, and it also feels pretty good on the hand. It's smoother around the sides, so you don't necessarily feel it jet into your hands if you're holding it. The transitions, they line up reasonably well, but around the end of the Kashira, you can kind of see where basically it's an older sword. I don't know how old this one is, but it is certainly a few years old, and the Samegawa panels have retreated, and you can kind of make out a little bit more of the, under the carriage, if you will, than you'd like to. So that is a little bit of a downside, but overall it's fixed reasonably well and reasonably well done. Moving up to the handle, the shape of the handle doesn't have a whole lot of wasting or detail, and it's a little on the wide side visually, but it has kind of an apple-seeded shape that indexes in my fingers really well. So I do actually really like the way it feels in my hand. Unfortunately, it's deterred a little bit by the wandering diamonds. They seem to be different shapes and sizes, and they all picked a different direction to scatter, it seems. So that it's reasonably tight. It hasn't come undone over the years. It is pretty old. It doesn't look like it's been handled very much, but that could contribute to looseness and how some of the diamonds appear misshapen. It's not as though this is fresh from the factory, but I digress. It's not terribly tight. and the diamonds weren't particularly well placed from the factory. This was common, unfortunately, on a number of Hanweis, and it's really unfortunate to see on such an expensive sword, but it was present even on the highest end from Hanwei, or one of the higher ends from Hanwei. The skins are pretty nice, though. The Samegawa panels used are of a reasonable grade and show pretty thick Samegawa skin. There's also on the core, I took the core apart, incidentally, and it actually came apart reasonably well, which is rare. I've tried to take a few of the other Kami Katana apart, and whether they come apart seems to be hit or miss. This one came apart pretty easily, and underneath the hood I can make out some shimming and stuff like that, some fiddly bits that were done to make this one feel good in the hand, and it seems to have been done around one of the Samegawa panels. It looks like some nodules were glued in to give a solid look overall. Why they didn't put in the right size panel, to be determined, but they didn't just leave it and throw it out there. They took some extra steps to shim and place things so that things would be right and tight, and the quality control on this one, I would say, is on the better side than I've seen from Hanwei. Anyway, Manuki, I'm not sure what they are. I'm guessing there's a dragon or a snake or something in there because I see scales, but I'm not quite sure. They're covered up a little bit. Casting quality, though, looks pretty good. Fuchi lines up well, and I like the black and bronze look. It has kind of a sheen to it. I think it goes well. I think the application of silver on the crane is tastefully done, and it all lines up and does everything reasonably well. The wandering diamonds are really the major disappointment, but I do like the overall feel of the handle. It indexes, again, better just because it seems to round a little bit, have a little bit more taper towards the ha side, and it fits really well in my hand in this particular case. Anyway, on to the Tsuba. The Tsuba has Fire Guardians on here, and I think the Tsuba is a great example of what Hanwei does well. The lines and whatnot are crisp. You can make out facial details. Things don't look particularly muddy. Hanwei, and perhaps Dragon King, I've had less experience with them, but I see some nice castings from them as well. I think they have some affiliation with Hanwei, but Hanwei seems to do a really good job casting fittings. They tend to be consistent, detailed, and while they are a kind of a mooncast shadow of the very elaborate, engraved, and chiseled out Tsuba that they're emulating, they are a better representation, frankly, than most of the market can provide, and I think Hanwei really does an exceptional job on the castings, on the application of gold detailing and stuff. Sometimes that detailing can look like it's finger painted on, and it really kind of ruins the look. This is tasteful. I don't necessarily like the gold and silver detailing on here, but I do acknowledge that it's well applied in Hanwei's case. And so I do think that you can make out the facial details, and that the strings and the lute and whatnot, or the instruments and stuff, are showing up well here. There's a lot of detail that you can make out. I appreciate that is possible, and it seems to be more possible with castings from Hanwei than castings from other companies that I've seen. So something that they do pretty well. On the reverse side of the Tsuba, there's cranes, again, tastefully applied. The Tsuba, I believe, is copper and darkened, so it doesn't have the same sheen as the other bits on the sword. The habaki, if I talk about this briefly, the habaki is a two-piece habaki, and it is somewhat weirdly put together. I took the sword apart for cleaning, and the copper piece wraps around the habaki, or wraps around the nakago a little differently, and the shoulders of the munei rest, the hamachi mumachi rest inside there, which is just different than I've seen done on two-piece habaki. Typically, they don't fit together this way. The base of the habaki on CAS Iberias' website is also said to be gold-plated. I haven't seen that to be the case on any habaki on a Kami Katana that I've had. They've always been brass and copper. But it is, to my knowledge, the only two-piece habaki that Hanwei makes. You can tell it's been fiddled with a little bit, and it's on there pretty good. I do like that the habaki is pressed into the bohi a little bit. It follows the line of the sword. I think it's nice for Hanwei, and it certainly shows a custom touch. I like the habaki despite the fact that it's still a little bit on the wonky side. Moving on to the saya. The saya has metal parts on it, so you have a metal koiguchi, kurigata, and kojiri. This was common on some of the higher end pieces from Hanwei. Now, the metal koiguchi doesn't really show much of anything. It arguably makes Noto a little harder because it covers up some of the scabbard with with metal, and it means that you can scratch it. This one hasn't been used very much, so I like that it isn't all scratched up. And there's not a lot of detailing. In some cases, the metal Koiguchi Hanwei makes have some elaborate pattern on them as well. This one just kind of blends in to, I believe it's rattan wrapped around the saya. It's got a black portion with some grooves in it that offer some texture and some visual break, though the saya admittedly is very bold. Your eye immediately is drawn to this very bright red looking scabbard, but the black bit hides the sageo a little bit, offers some texture. It's a nice break. And in there, in this black portion, is a kurigata that's hidden. It has some, I believe it's like a floral theme or something on it, but hidden in there is this metal kurigata, which is nice. They do tend to chew up sageo, incidentally, so untying it, moving it around, I don't know how functional it is to have one. Sometimes they don't, but sometimes they chew up the sageo or make it fray a little bit. Anyway, it's visually very appealing. The saya then goes down to the red portion. I've got some scuffs and scratches. It's worth noting that there's a black base on here. The kurigata, when I got this sword, did come off. I glued it back on, but what I could see is that there was a black base coat underneath the red. So if you chip the saya, you're going to see it very clearly because it will show black around it. If you chip it enough, it might look stylistically cool. maybe it would pull away, or you could sand it down and make it black. Anyway, there's a black base coat under there for if you're interested in knowing that. And then the bronze kurigata, or kojiri at the end, I should say, the little metal cap. Now, if you do seated kata, the metal caps tend to be a little bit more durable. If you bang the tip of the scabbard into the ground, the horn pieces that are often there can chip a little bit easier. Metal tends to hold up better to being whacked into wood and concrete and the like. So I do like it, and I do think it's on there well. The glue or adhesive that was on there failed, but it actually fits on pretty well and doesn't have like giant gaps and stuff like that on it. It's actually fit in there better than I would have expected. Anyway, the saya also fits reasonably well. It doesn't rattle, and overall the tension on it is still pretty good after all these years. It hasn't been used much, but having been shipped across the country and being in different places and being very old, I'm surprised that it's still in as good a shape as it is. Now I'm going to talk about the blade, the pointy stabby part, and there's a ton of features here. Now, profile blade-wise, it's a thicker blade, not quite in the XL geometry of Hanwei, but it's among the thicker side of things. It's got a very large okasaki on it. Now, this is, I think, a missed opportunity. The okasaki isn't polished in such a way that it really highlights that feature well, and the yokote is a little bit muddy. The polish, I would say, is a little bit more bog standard for Hanwei and their higher end stuff. It had a frosty hamon, and there is some etching on there that highlights the hara on the sword. It's made out of supposedly KC-120 folded powder steel. I'm not exactly sure if it's special or not. I haven't necessarily found it to be, but it does have a pretty pattern on the surface of the steel that you can admire. The lines on the blade are also soft. It's not necessarily the greatest polish. There's surface ripplings present a little bit here and there, more so in the bohi than anywhere else, but that was pretty common for Hanwei. Just to say that one of their highest end swords didn't necessarily receive a lot more polish attention than the others, but there are some features on here that are cool. The bohi, one, they terminate really well, and on one side of the bohi, it runs pretty far down into the nakago, which is uncommon. Two, it terminates above the horimono, which is, again, a very dominant feature here. It's like a blade engraving, and this is a hand engraved or hand kind of chiseled in feature. It's not etched, which is more common, I would say, when you see this type of work done on swords today. If I look back as well at the other examples of horimono on the other kami katana that I've had, some are better, some are worse, but they're all hand done and all a little bit different and offer some character in the sword that isn't present on most swords today. So it's cool to see this kind of hand done engraving. I can't tell you it's a bear to keep clean. Some of them have gotten rusty, and once the rust propagates to a point, it's really, really tough to clean. But if you keep on it, you can keep them shiny and new looking like this one is. Anyway, it's a very kind of prominent feature, front and center. It's cool to look at, and it's just not something that you see on a lot of swords. And I like the asymmetrical bohi as well. I think it's just a cool looking feature on this sword that isn't present elsewhere. But apart from that, it's very standard in the other realms that Hanwei has in terms of polish. It wasn't better done. The surfaces of the steel has ripples and things like that, and it was pretty standard sharpness, pretty standard this, that, and the other, given that this was their higher end piece. Feeling wise in the hand, it's a 29-inch blade. It's pretty wide and has a pretty short handle at 10.5 inches. It's really actually a sword that's my size, so I happen to like it, but I think most people would find it to be a little bit on the chunky side. It doesn't move around very agilely, but it is very feature rich and feels cool in the hand regardless. Anyway, that's been some of the visual tour of the Hanwei Kami Katana. I hope you found it interesting. If you're interested in seeing somebody swing it around, Cerberus Arms, in a video he did about how to tell the difference between a fake and a real one, mentioned the Kami Katana, and he does some cutting with his. So I'll link his videos down below if you haven't seen them. They're much more popular than mine, but he actually does some cutting. So if you want to see how they cut, which I can, spoiler alert, they do it well, I'll link his videos in the description down below. Anyway, that's all I've got. Hopefully it's been interesting. As always, cheers, and thanks for watching.